So before we get into the practicalities of PowerShell objects, I would first like to discuss the concept of types of objects. More specifically, types of real-world objects. So when we're in the real world, we typically categorize or classify things into types of objects. So one could probably say a tomato is a type of fruit, a bee is a type of insect, a sports car is also a type of car, which is also a type of vehicle. So through learned experiences and intuition, we tend to classify things into various different types of things. Now, it's those types of things which determine the properties, what they look like, and the functions, what they can do, which ultimately distinguishes one type of thing or object from the other type of thing or object. So let's look at a real world example. When we're talking about types of things, and I'm going to be talking about types of cars in this example. Let's go head out to the images. And I'm just going to click on this image here. And I'm going to say that a supercar is a type of car. A coupe is also a type of car. And in a similar vein, a roadster is also a type of car. Now, collectively, all these types of cars are also types of vehicle. More specifically, they're all types of motorized vehicles. So again, we're classifying or categorizing things into type systems. So what is the purpose of classifying objects according to a type, and what benefit does that bring to us when it comes to learning about PowerShell objects? Right, so if we know what type of object we're dealing with, we also know what type of functions we can request from that object. So for example, if we have a supercar, we know that that supercar is a type of vehicle. And we know that we can request of that vehicle certain kinds of functions. So we can ask the supercar to accelerate. We can ask the supercar to decelerate or change its course of direction. So ultimately, when we classify things into types, it's all about knowing what we can do with those objects. And similarly, in PowerShell, this translates directly over into PowerShell objects. When we know what type of object we're dealing with, we know exactly what type of functions we can request from that object. We know what types of properties are available on that object. So a supercar, for example, may have a color property. It may have a weight property. It may have an accelerate function. Now in PowerShell, these functions and properties are collectively known as the object's members. So that begs the question, how do we get the members of an object within PowerShell? So let's head over to PowerShell. Here we are. I'm just going to create a string object. This is a string, if I can spell, string object. And what I'm going to do with that string object is I'm going to push or pipe that string object into the getMember commandlet. Now this makes intuitive sense. GetMember sounds just like what it is. It's going to get the members of this object that's going into it. So what I'm going to do is press enter, and indeed getMember gets all the members. So if you can remember back, we remember that methods and properties are collectively known as the members of an object. Now forget all this information for a second. I want to draw your attention to the first line that is outputted from getMember. This is the critical aspect of getMember. This tells us what type of object it is we're dealing with. Now here we have a system.string. Now this is a .NET type of type string, so it's a string type. Now, don't worry about .NET types for the moment. What we're ultimately saying is this is a string type, and this is what we can do with it, and this is one of its properties. So what can we do to a string or a .NET string type? We can clone it. We can get the string's hash code. We can find, we can insert stuff into it, and we can add padding to the left and right. We can remove characters from it. We can split it. We can do all sorts of weird and wonderful things to this string object. And if you glance down here, we can see a property on that object. So let's just try that for a second. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit up arrow. I'm going to delete this, and I'm going to get right back here. And this is our object. This is the string object we're dealing with. Now, in order to access a property on an object, we use something called dot notation. So we take the object, we append a dot, and then we access the property. We can just use tab completion. We access a property or a method. We can cycle through the properties and methods by repeatedly hitting the tab button. So if I hit it, but it's automatically determined that I want the length anyway. So let's just delete that for a second. So let's go back to the dot. Let's cycle through, and as you can see, I'm cycling through all the methods, but I don't want, I'll go right to the end, maybe hold it down, see where it goes. As you can see, we are indeed cycling through all the methods, but what we actually want is the length property. So I'm just going to hit enter, and as you can see, PowerShell has calculated that the length of this string object is 23 characters. Excellent. So to summarize, when we know what type of object we're dealing with in PowerShell, we ultimately know what we can or can't do with that object. And this is one of the key traits to successful object-oriented programming. We have to know what type of object we're dealing with. So in order to know what type of object we're dealing with, we just pipe that object to getMember.